Berbera40 basically started as kind of a joke, but when I discovered there were a couple of existing scenarios for it, I decided to go ahead and give it a shot just to see how this little scenario, kind of at the far edge of the standard Europa series scale, how that would actually work out with such small units, small number of units, fairly large territory. Also, it gave me the opportunity to implement rules for attack supply, which I hadn't done previously. Attack supply is generally used in the games based in North Africa, the Near East, and East Africa. And I think that's what we have going here. East Africa. So this is really all about attack supply right now. And I've set up a fairly contrived situation to demonstrate some of the things that happen with attack supply. The French forces are going to be involved, although historically that wasn't going to happen. The scenario will permit it, although I'm not sure it's recommended for either side. But just to demonstrate, we'll get some French forces involved here. So right now we're in the combat phase of the Axis player turn for June 2, 1940. Units have already moved. Of course, everybody has already done all the things that they need to do to get themselves prepared for combat. We're in the combat phase, and here we go. So let's start our first combat here. We'll attack these outlying units of the British Somaliland Camel Corps with some Italian units. We'll initiate the attack. And if you've seen some of my previous demos, you'll see something new here. There's now a column of checkboxes, and those are attack supply checkboxes. And the system has already looked behind the scenes to determine which units can possibly be in or will probably be in attack supply for this attack, and it's checked those boxes accordingly. For units that either can't possibly get in supply or probably won't be in supply, the boxes are not checked. Now we can get an idea of what's going on if we look here. We hover our mouse over this and this pops up. Oh, some of that went off screen, but what it actually says is supply available for attack from depot or from points being carried by the unit. And that's because the Italian unit is carrying some supply points, as well as being assigned to a depot that's in range and has enough supply points. So that unit is going to be able to expend attack supply from either the points it carries or the points back at the depot, or not at all if it chooses that. And then we'll get down here to this guy. Now he's not carrying any supply points, and again that went a little bit off screen, but what it says is supply available for attack from depot. So he's not carrying units. That light armor brigade is not carrying supply, I should say, but he can draw supply from his depot. That's also true of these two guys. We look to this one, and we say no supply available for attack. And I happen to know that's because the 13th Colonial Infantry Brigade has been set up, and again, this is a somewhat contrived situation to say that it is not assigned to any depot. And since it's not assigned to a depot, it can't draw attack supply from a depot. And since it's not carrying supplies, it can't get attack supply that way either, which means there's no way that the 13th Brigade is going to be able to get attack supply. So it won't be at full strength in the attack, assuming it decides to attack at all. And if we go down here, again, this is going to run off the edge, but it says supply for attack might be available if another unit assigned to this depot chooses not to use it. So what that's telling us, and we'll see more about this in just a second, is that the depot from which a bunch of these units is drawing supply, there's not enough supply points in the depot to fully supply all the units that want supply. Now we can get a full report on that if we want. And mind you, this is a contrived situation. We're going through complicated stuff that normally wouldn't happen. And even if it does happen, you don't have to bother with all the things that I'm going to do. But this is just a demonstration. So we'll go up here and say, give us this attack supply report. Tell us what's going on with this attack. And what it's going to do, put this down here where it's more visible in the recording. There, I think that's pretty good. It's saying that for this particular attack, we're drawing from 3 different depots. There are actually 2 depots and 1 not assigned to any depot at all. And first of all, we have the 14th Colonial Infantry Brigade that's in the attack that is drawing its supply from this depot up here at, what is that, Asia? And it's saying that that depot has 7 supply points on hand. It's getting a request for 1 point of supply that's coming from this brigade, and the supply is available, so that's not a problem. That unit will be able to expend attack supply if it wants to do so. Now, when we get to the next depot here in Harar, it only has 4 points on hand. It says right now there are 4 points that are being requested, but that includes 1 point that's from a unit that is also carrying supply. So up to this moment, we haven't determined, is that unit going to use the depot or the points that it's carrying in order to provide attack supply. So it's telling us that that could go either way. So we look here. Now we'll go corps by corps. The first corps is the one that has the Somali Light Infantry Brigade in it. And it needs 1 point of supply. It's carrying 2. And it's also drawing its supply from Harar. So it's available from both places. So supply is available for attack from depot or from points carried. And of course, that's the same thing that it said when we put our cursor over there. It's telling us, okay, that 1 unit can get supply from either place. We'll resolve that before we're finished. But at the moment, it's just letting us know that supply can go either way. It can come from either source. Now, for the other corps, the 1st Armored Corps, we have, of the 6 units in there, we have 1 of them that got assigned to another depot, so it's not listed here. And we have 1 that's assigned to no depot at all, so it's not listed here. So there are 4 remaining that are attempting, 4 remaining from this corps that are attempting to draw supply from this depot. The depot has 4. They're trying to pull 4. So it says, okay, that light armored brigade, it needs 2, because combat motorized and cavalry units require double their REs in order to be fully attack supplied. So that's 2. And then there's 1 here, plus the 1 that might be coming here, so that's 4. So that expends all 4 of them. And is telling us that that's it. You only had 4. So the next 2 units, the 2 artillery units, the attack supply check boxes are not by default checked off because there's not enough supply to go around. So that's the full report on what's happening. And again, this is a kind of an odd situation. I set this up to demonstrate a lot of different things. You won't normally face this, but if you do, you might say, this is what the system chose, but I don't want that. I want to put everybody in supply. So you can do that, and then you can run that report again, and you can see some things turned red here, and that's because those 2 artillery regiments, there's not really enough supply for them. So it says supply for this attack might be available if another unit that's assigned to the depot chooses not to use attack supply. Well, the only way that can happen, the unit itself isn't going to choose. The player will have to say, yeah, I'll let someone else have the attack supply, so that I'll let someone else not have it, I should say, so that the artillery unit can have it. So we'll close that, and we'll come up here and say, well, look, the 15th Colonial, I don't really need to give them attack supply. So let's see what happens if we run this again. And now it's saying, okay, and because the 15th chose not to expend attack supply, that freed up 1 point, the system automatically gave that to the next one on the list, which is the 3rd Artillery Regiment, whereas the 4th Regiment still doesn't have supply. So you can close that, and you can continue clicking around here as much as you want until you have the supplies set up the way that you want it. Now, as always, you can say, oh, I don't want these units to attack, which would be kind of unusual. Or you can specifically say, I don't want a particular unit to be expending attack supply, so you can just uncheck those. This one, the 13th Colonial Brigade, notice that the box is disabled, and that's because that's the brigade that is not carrying supplies and also is not assigned to any depot. So there's no way that it can get attack supply, so there's no way that it can check the box. So if you care to fiddle with this, you can continue fiddling with this as much as you want and checking the attack supply report as many times as you want to see what you get. And then ultimately, though, once you have it the way that you want it, or at least the way that you think you want it, then you can go ahead and say resolve combat. Notice that this box is checked over here, so we're going to get the full after combat battle report when we click on this. And now comes a quick dialogue here about the Italian Somali Light Infantry Brigade. That's the unit that is carrying supplies, and it also has supplies available at the depot. And the player now needs to make the decision, what are we going to do? Are we going to expend the supplies that are being carried, or are we going to expend the supplies that are back at the depot? Now, if we wanted to not expend any supplies at all, we would have unchecked the checkbox that says, I don't want to expend supplies. So we've already said we want to expend supplies, and now the question is, where are they coming from? From supplies being carried or supplies back at the depot? We'll say, okay, we're going to get them from what's being carried. Once we've made that decision, it is, of course, going to free up a point of supply, and the system is going to be able to give that to somebody along the line. So we'll say, okay, combat gets resolved. Let's make this a little more visible. And that information has now all been added to the usual after battle report. So we look at the Somali Light Brigade, which is in this corps, and it says that that brigade expended carried attack supply, so there was no reduction to its combat factor. Now, it was reduced because it wasn't supported, but otherwise it's okay in terms of supply. If we look at the main corps here, we can see that the Light Armor Brigade expended attack supply, no reduction. The 13th, which is the one that couldn't get supply from anywhere, but it was in general supply, so it was halved. And then we have the 14th and the 15th that both expended. The 3rd Artillery expended, so all three of those are at no reduction in combat factor, and that is they're at their full attack strength because they're in attack supply. But we still had one unit. We didn't have enough supply to go around. We still had one unit, the 4th Artillery Regiment, even though we selected it and said, oh yeah, give these guys some supply. The system said, well, we don't have enough for everybody, so we're going to pick someone who doesn't get it, and this was the odd man out. So he was halved because he's only in general supply because he couldn't expend attack supply. So we'll close that up. And so what do we get here? Oh, we get a defender eliminated, and we'll go ahead and advance all those units. Now, that was a lot of fiddling around. That took a long time, but only because I wanted to demonstrate a lot of possibilities. In most cases, it's going to be more like this. We'll move on to this combat up here. We'll initiate this attack. Again, I'm not recommending that the Italians should go in and mess with the French. This is just for demonstration here. It's showing that it thinks it can put all three of those units in attack supply. We can check the report if we want to. We don't have to. And if I pulled all that down so you could see it all, it would tell us what's going on. Everything is okay. We won't change anything. We'll just go ahead and resolve combat. And we don't really care what happened there. The point being that although as usual I took forever trying to explain all the different permutations of what could and could not happen in calculating attack supply. In most cases, there's nothing to it. You just go with what the system shows you. Or if you want to fiddle with it at all, you just say, put everybody in an attack supply. And if the system can't do it, it'll leave some people out and everything will be fine. And of course, if you want to conserve attack supply, because maybe you don't have enough to go around for a long time, you can conserve it by just saying, I don't want to put these guys in attack supply at all. I'll just leave them in general supply and they can attack at half strength. So anyway, that's the story with attack supply that has now been added to my supply module for these scenarios. Thanks for taking a look at this. Take care.